Hello everybody and welcome to the SSX 3 All Peak No Input Challenge. That's right, I've gone straight from making a video about going faster than humanly possible in this game to pretty much the opposite end of the scale. Namely, starting the race and immediately unplugging the controller. Now, I'm definitely not the first person to try a challenge like this, and according to the other people in the SSX community Discord that had been running this challenge before me, the best runs have come from giving the riders full speed and acceleration without boosting any of their other stats. So those are the stat levels that each of the riders will have in the runs in this video. And shout out to Tinosaurus for helping me set up a PCSX2 memory card that allows you to boot up the game with near infinite money and the all peak events automatically unlocked when you start the game, because it'd be extremely time consuming to work towards this challenge in the default version of the game. Now, prior to the runs that you'll see in a moment, I'd done quite a few similar no input runs with every character, but then I realized I was doing these runs in the all peak race event, when I could have been selected the all peak jam and got an extra 5 minutes to reach the bottom. So I ultimately did a whole bunch of no input runs for nothing. But it did give me an idea of the biggest obstacles on this route going into the main event. And the biggest one of them all is at the end of Gravitude, where the finish line is blocked off by a fence that runs at basically a 90-degree angle. If you're not controlling the rider at all, then they're guaranteed to run into this fence. If they start riding along the fence towards the right, then you should be on your way again. But if they head towards the left, then the only way you're getting out of this area is if you actually have manual control of them. Otherwise, this area is a dead zone. The rider that I had the least faith in going into this event was Nate, because it took me an agonizing 16 resets for me to see him get past the end of Gravitude. Meanwhile, Griff tends to be the go-to rider for people attempting this challenge, so I probably had the highest expectations of him going into this. Alright, so at the start, everyone's going to be in near perfect sync, but that's only going to last about 5 seconds. Now, when we approach this narrow area, we're going to start seeing people lag behind, and Griff's has taken the first tumble of this event. Moby's bounced on the rocks, Max got straight over the rocks and over to the chasm in the left, and he's taken a tumble as well, as is Vigo. And Mac and Vigo are stuck in that area. Vigo's just gotten out, but Mac has not been so lucky. So at the moment, he is at the back of the pack. Leading the pack at the moment, it would be Kaori, as she's just hit that ice rail in that one part. I don't know, these sections don't have like official names. And it looks like Mac is now slightly ahead of Vigo at the back. And we've got people in the caves who've generally fallen to their temporary demises. And Moby and Simon have pretty much exited the cave in tandem, so they are at the front of the leaderboard at the moment. But being at the front might not matter if, in the long run, you're just going to get stuck at the Gravitude finish line. A lot of things can go wrong, as we can see with Zoe, who's got stuck behind a rock at that cave exit. So I think that has pushed her to the back. I think Kaori is still maintaining a narrow lead, but it's kind of hard for me to focus on 10 different perspectives of this at the same time, so bear with me, please. Approaching the 33-minute mark, and I think Zoe is now the rider languishing at the rear, with Kaori... no, actually, Simon. Moby is in first, with Simon just behind. Kaori in third, I believe. So they're all... I think everyone except Zoe has gone through that little cave, would you call it? Or an overpass? I don't know. I'm no snowboarding or like mountain geography expert, but we've got a bunch of riders in that sort of like natural half pipe area. Moby's the first one down the drop, followed shortly by Simon, and Vigo's just approaching those natural half pipes. Kaori's taken the plunge. Vigo is, he's about to take the plunge. Nate is about neck and neck with him now as well. Elise is going into that area as well. And Actually, by the looks of it, I think Cowrie is going to be the first rider to make it down that home straight, although she just took a tumble. So Moby's bouncing around those, so that's not going to do him any favors. And actually, Simon's the first one to touch that wall over there, so he's only very slowly crawling down that home straight. Carrie's made that turn without falling over at all, so she's kept all her momentum. Who's going to be the first? Okay, Simon's the first rider to cross the snowplow at the end there. Moby second, Cowrie third, and we've got riders in the Black Station area now. Now, there's an area in the lead up to the main Peak 3 hub area that proved to be the first real problem. And at the moment, I think Griff is the first person to reach this first particularly problematic area. Although, I think Nate's going to bypass it by not going high enough on that turn. Cowrie's also going to bypass that area. And that area, I'm going to call it the whirlpool, because if you get stuck in the middle of it, then you could just be drifting around aimlessly for possibly several minutes. I don't think I've seen any riders get permanently stuck in that area where the signpost is, but the amount of time that the riders spend in that area can vary quite wildly. So the whirlpool has claimed, oh, Moby's just gotten out of the whirlpool. Simon, Griff, Elise, and Zoe still trying to escape its clutches. I think Mac was having a little bit of trouble in the whirlpool, so his road to the hub area is a bit sluggish. Nate, Vigo, and Allegra, almost all of the new crew. Griff's still in the whirlpool, but those other three are making some very strong progress towards Gravitude. And I think Nate is going to be the first rider to enter the Gravitude course properly. Max having a bit of trouble with these rocks next to the bit that splits between the slope style and race areas. And Zoe is heading straight for those rocks as well. So, not ideal. But she's popped out and she's back on the right path. Mac, I'm sure he'll do the same any minute now. So yeah, we've got Nate on Gravitude. He's just hit a billboard. Allegra's on Gravitude. Vigo is still close to the starting line of Gravitude. Nate's just gone over that big chasm there. Allegra's doing an upside down grind, but not sticking the landing. Elise is still stuck in the whirlpool. Moby is just approaching the starting area of Gravitude. Simon also lagging a bit far behind. He's only just made it to the race and slope style divide. Cowrie is... oh, well, actually, Nate is still in first. He's gone over that big jump. Cowrie's in the cave as well. Vigo currently in second, I believe. And Cowrie in third. Vigo's fallen into the pit there. And Cowrie collected a speed boost, which I believe has allowed her to go over that jump cleanly. But she's just taken a tumble, so maybe Vigo could overtake in the very near future, except he's just taken a tumble as well. So Zoe hit the signpost at the Gravitude start area in such a way that she's now heading backwards. Nate's currently in the plane wreckage shortcut, and Vigo's having a bit of trouble. A Swedish man getting into trouble at a bridge. Why does that sound familiar? But he is free, even though he might be severely concussed, and also Elise is finally free of the whirlpool after getting stuck in there for about 5 minutes. You may have noticed that I have sped up the game in Mac's case because he is still in that bloody set of rocks. As a matter of fact, Elise might be about to overtake him, and that will be the case because she's just been sent into a reset area and she is now well and truly on her way to Gravitude, unlike Mr. Mac. Allegra's just taken a major hit on some foliage, so that's killed her momentum a bit. Meanwhile, Mr. Logan is in the midst of a triple rail grind, which can only do good things to his momentum. And as a matter of fact, we're going to focus now on Nate and Cowrie, who are quite far ahead to the point that they're going to be the first two riders to hit the dreaded Gravitude finish line. Nate is approaching, and he's taken the rails on the left-hand side, which may be less than ideal because he's going to hit the fence in the dead center pretty much. But he's drifting towards the right. Carrie's also heading for the left-hand side, whilst Nate is maybe slowing down a bit. Carrie is also drifting to the right, but with a bit more consistent speed. But Nate has unfortunately been pulled to the dead zone. But Carrie becomes our first rider to clear Gravitude. Meanwhile, Allegra hits the Gravitude fence and heads straight for the dead zone as well. Vigo is going to be the fourth rider to reach the Gravitude finish line, and he does so via the right-hand side rails. That could especially put him at an advantage because he's going to hit that end fence right near the end. And unsurprisingly, given the circumstances, he makes it around the corner. Mr. Moby Jones is going to be the next rider to reach the end of Gravitude by a fairly considerable distance. And he's heading for the right-hand side rails, but he misses them. So he's going a bit more central to this fence here. But I can already tell that he was sliding to the left, and yeah, there he goes with very little fight into the dead zone. Simon is going to be the next one to get there, though he's still got a couple more corners to turn. Meanwhile, Elise is just making her way through that cave there. Actually, no, Griff is taking the left-hand side rails. He's bounced off the second one, which could wreak havoc because he's very far to the left of that fence. But he is sliding towards the right now as Simon also approaches the finish line. Is Griff going to have the momentum to get around the corner? I can tell you Simon is just going to head straight for the dead zone, and Griff is going to be unable to escape the pull of the dead zone as well. Zoe is next to reach the bottom of Gravitude, heading for those right-hand side rails, and she is riding all of them masterfully. That should put her in a pretty similar position to Vigo, as she'll have very little fence to maneuver around. And she's about to maneuver around the corner, but what's this? It seems that the invisible bouncer is saying, sorry, you're not allowed into the club. Zoe's been defined in response, but I think the dead zone is slowly sucking her in, and now she is accepting her fate and accepting that this run is counting for very little. And due to her troubles in the whirlpool, Elise approaches the end of Gravitude about a minute behind Zoe, who was already pretty far behind herself. She's evaded the right-hand side rails, and I think she's facing just a little bit to the left. And the left is where the dead zone is, so yep, that's her run done as well. So she loses out just before the 20-minute mark. Meanwhile, at the 20-minute mark in Mac's run, guess what? He was still stuck in those bleeding rocks. So let's just call that run throwaway and move on. Because luckily for Mac and Elise especially, I was doing this challenge as a best of 3. So before we get to Vigo and Cowrie, let's see if the other 8 riders managed to clear Gravitude on their second attempt. Well, Zoe wedged herself between those 2 rocks again, but instead of fighting her way out, she said, you know what, I'm starting to see why Mac stayed here. This is actually quite nice. And Mac was like, I know, right? It's like nature's full body massage. I gave both of them till 10 minutes had passed to get out of that situation, and I'm not sure that either of them would have gotten out even if I left them for the entire 35 minutes. But regardless, if 10 minutes have passed and you haven't even made it out of the Peak 3 hub area, then your run's probably not worth saving. Elise, meanwhile, spent no more than 30 seconds in the whirlpool on her second run, only to get stuck on this DNL billboard. It is possible for the game to automatically reset you when you're stuck in this spot, but that seems to only be the case for the riders that are on the shorter side. So once again I waited for 10 in-game minutes to pass, and when Elise was still stuck there, I just wrote this run off as well. Meanwhile, Allegra managed to get here and somehow do a sort of loop-de-loop and then get huge air, despite having 0 input into her actions. But it isn't really worth looking over the rest of her second run, or the second runs of Moby, Griff and Nate for that matter, because all 4 of them got stuck at the bottom of Gravitude. Last but certainly not least, we have Simon. As a matter of fact, he's the best in this case, because on his second run, he managed to become our third rider to get past the end of Gravitude. That still leaves a majority of riders yet to clear Gravitude after 2 attempts. I would have loved to have kept doing these runs until every rider made it past Gravitude, but remember, I had to do this run with Nate 17 different times before I saw him go past the Gravitude finish line. That's why this competition is best of 3 and 3 only. Out of those 7 riders, only one of them managed to not get caught up in the whirlpool. That rider was Moby, and he didn't avoid the whirlpool because he rode around it, but because he didn't even make it out of the throne. The bleeding git got stuck at a spot that I didn't even realize it was possible to get stuck in. Allegra only really dipped her toe into the whirlpool though, and Mac also got out of there fairly quickly. And that might have put him at a pretty big advantage if he didn't get wedged between those 2 rocks for the 3rd time in a row. Maybe he just feels at home in this spot because he has rocks in his head. The remaining 5 riders did manage to get to the bottom of Gravitude. The first one to do so was Allegra, but unfortunately she wouldn't take advantage of that opportunity. Elise was the next one to hit the fence, but she headed straight for the dead zone afterwards. Zoe was next, and ditto. Meanwhile, Griff managed to get as far to the right as he possibly could when he hit that fence and managed to round the corner on his final attempt. Lastly, Nate hit that fence quite a bit further to the left, but seemingly by sheer force of will, he managed to ride the fence all the way to the right and leave Gratitude as well. With that, we now have a definitive bottom 5 for the SSX 3 all-peak no-input competition. First, we've got Mac at rock bottom, though he might be happy with that considering how much he apparently likes rocks. Moby may have achieved the single worst run in this entire competition, but at least he actually made it to Gravitude at some point, so he only gets second last place. In 8th place is Zoe on account of 2 Gravitude finishes and 1 run that didn't make it past Black Station. In 7th is Elise thanks to 3 Gravitude finishes, though one of them only made it about a third of the way down the course. Meanwhile, Allegra got stuck at the bottom of Gravitude on all 3 attempts, so she finishes in 6th place. Now here's how things currently stand in the top 5 based on the amount of time that had passed when each rider rounded the corner of the Gravitude fence. So the first rider to do so was Cowrie, followed closely behind by Simon, and then followed not quite as closely behind by Vigo, then far less closely behind by Griff and Nate. Griff and Nate's runs each saw them spending nearly 3 whole minutes in the whirlpool. And on top of that, Nate spent almost a full minute trapped in the Mac rocks. So we will be checking back in with Griff and Nate to see how their third runs are doing. But most of our focus now is going to be on Vigo and Cowrie's first run and Simon's second run. We're going to resume from when 24 minutes were remaining. We have Vigo just leaving Gravitude and Cowrie leading the charge to Yellow Station ahead of Simon. Now, I think I've put so much effort into editing the first part of this video that the thought of doing a semi-live commentary for the rest of this run is extremely daunting. So to make sure that I'll be continuously talking throughout the rest of the video, I'm just going to show the highlights and various other milestones in the race as they happen. So Cowrie is the first rider to properly see the sun set, but then she slowed down big time after riding into this rock near the station. Meanwhile, when Simon hit that rock, he just powered on through. So they were pretty much neck and neck as they approached the Lodge and Event Divide. But that would quickly change as Cowrie got a little bit stuck on this invisible wall, and Simon yet again just powered on by. So Simon began to blaze a pretty considerable lead in the path between the Lodge and Ruthless Ridge. Meanwhile, Vigo managed to get even more stuck on that invisible wall than Cowrie did. Chin up, you're still on your way to a podium position. That would be nothing to be ashamed of, buddy. Approaching the passing of 22 minutes, and Cowrie has got some pretty sweet rail grinds in this area leading up to Ruthless Ridge, and now it's Simon's turn to get stuck. So once again, there's a swap in the first and second place position. However, Cowrie clipping through that fence and Simon getting a nice little downhill boost means that Cowrie was still the first rider to officially reach the Ruthless Ridge course, but only marginally. Fast forward to when Vigo first made onto Ruthless Ridge, and here Cowrie takes the stylish high rail route, helping her maintain what is still a fairly slim lead over Simon. Speaking of stylish high routes, Vigo's managed to land on this side rail early on, and he rides it far enough to make it onto this side path. It's a scenic route for sure, but will it actually allow him to shorten the distance between him and the two riders vying for first? Well, before we can have a more definitive answer to that question, we have Cowrie approaching this big jump. Having put a bit more distance between herself and Simon, she didn't make it over the gap, and neither did Simon. But Cowrie managed to go through the pillar section completely unimpeded, whereas Simon took some pretty hard knocks. Vigo actually did manage to get over that big gap. Meanwhile, Simon took this side path all the way to ensure that Cowrie still couldn't take her lead for granted. But that may have been what she was starting to do, because she was absolutely rattled during this descent, and Simon was much less so. Cowrie did still at least make it onto the ending shortcut. Meanwhile, Simon tried to get onto that path a different way, but was reset back onto the main path. So the distance between first and second widens even more, as Vigo also manages to take the shortcut path. So Cowrie becomes the first rider to hit the bottom of Ruthless Ridge as Simon approaches the final big jump. Meanwhile, Vigo's coming out of that shortcut like a rocket. Simon ends up riding along the fence, and now he's been spun sideways. And now he's drifting backwards as Vigo charges into the finish line arch, but he soldiers on, and so third becomes second and second becomes third. You truly can't count out anyone to win this challenge. Well, aside from the 5 riders that didn't get past Gratitude, of course. And we could probably count out Griff and Nate as well. But we'll check in with them anyways, and once the top 3 riders had all passed the Ruthless Ridge finish line, Griff was about halfway down the ridge, meanwhile Nate was only just approaching the starting area. Cowrie maintained her lead as she entered Intimidator, though she did lose a little bit of momentum going on that side path past the start gates. Luckily for her, Vigo also lost a bit of momentum in that same area. Cowrie went high on this first turn and landed straight on that rail. Stylish. Vigo also went up in the air but went over that rail like a scrub. And it turns out there's a reset point right there. So on top of the rail is fine, but just slightly to the right, that's no good. Simon also managed to get on top of that rail, though he did so in a much less adventurous way. Vigo gets tripped up here by nothing, as far as I can tell. And Cowrie's approaching the broken bridge, but she's heading diagonally and she runs smack bang into a pole, so she's going to need to circle back around and line up for the bridge a second time. Or a third time, apparently. Vigo's now heading for the broken bridge himself, and he only needs the one attempt to make it up the ramp. And it's a catastrophe for Cowrie at the moment, as she appears to be stuck in a loop. Now Simon's approaching the broken bridge, and like Vigo, he stays fairly straight and gets it right the first time. It's another big shake-up in the top 3, as Cowrie continues circling in this area like her hopes of first place are potentially circling the drain. And it's the flying Swede, Vigo Rolig, that's pulled into the lead, as I'm sure everyone expected would happen. And let's check back in on Griff and Nate. Nate is still working his way down Ruthless Ridge, and oh god, I think Griff's gotten himself stuck too. Let's check back in with him once he's hopefully wriggled free. Cowrie did manage to wriggle out of her circle of doom, but by the time she managed to do that, Vigo was leaving the tunnel and Simon was just about to enter it. Then Cowrie lost even more precious seconds by running into this rock and needing a second attempt to round this corner. Vigo suddenly decided to take a breather for a second here, but Simon still had plenty of ground to cover if he was going to take the lead back. With 12 minutes remaining, Vigo and Simon were both in the forest section, whereas Cowrie had only just entered the pagoda area. Back to Griff and Nate is now officially in 4th place as he makes his way through Red Station, and Griff is still stuck just past the end of Ruthless Ridge, and he could very well be there permanently. Now in the forest section, Vigo stayed on the main path, whereas Simon managed to get onto this out of bounds path. So that definitely could have helped him cut the distance between him and Vigo at the top. But what helped him even more was Vigo running into this tree in such a way that he started heading back up the track, quite slowly. Once Vigo had course corrected himself, Simon was practically breathing down his neck. And as a matter of fact, Simon actually reached the next checkpoint shortly before Vigo did. And Simon's second run was the first run that I'd recorded on this day where I managed to reach this area, and that meant I was greeted by the dreaded question mark. And some of you might be thinking, well, if this is a no input run, then that means that you can't get rid of this menu, so that's the run over. But it's okay, because you can close this menu without pushing any buttons that could potentially void the no input aspect. because all you have to do is push the triangle button a couple of times, and the triangle button doesn't have any sort of function during gameplay. So don't worry, purists, I still wasn't actually controlling Simon himself. And it was Simon who carved out a noticeable lead as he made his way from Green Station to Snow Jam. But this rail would give him a little bit of trouble. So while he still entered Snow Jam itself in the lead, one major mistake could easily lead to Vigo reclaiming the top spot. And speaking of mistakes, Carrie ran into this rock and started heading back towards the lodge. Hey, you might ultimately have to settle for third place in this competition, but you'll always be number one in our hearts. Now early on in Snow Jam, Vigo and Simon were basically neck and neck, taking quite different routes from one another, but still being pretty hard to separate distance-wise. That is, until Simon headed straight for the side of this arch, sending him sideways and into the slower underpass. Then he had a fairly rough time passing underneath this bandstand, so Vigo entered the forest with a pretty considerable lead. And Griff did manage to escape that spot he was stuck in. How about that? Of course, the final outcome is probably going to be the exact same as if he got stuck in that crevice for the rest of the race, because he's at the top of Intimidator and Nate is at the bottom. But he should get at least a little bit more of a dignified finish this way. 5 minutes left on the clock, and Vigo suddenly thinks that he might actually be a bird. That allows Simon to continue breathing down his neck, and at the ending bridge, Vigo is stopped dead in his tracks, allowing Simon to get marginally ahead of him. However, Vigo being quickly put back onto his feet, and Simon taking quite a bit more time to recover, meant that Vigo quickly took back the lead. And he did the loop-de-loop for good measure. Sorry Vigo, that doesn't count as you completing the big challenge. You're going to have to go back and do that later. Now in this transitional area between Snow Jam and the Blue Station region, I think Vigo and Simon were quite literally in sync with one another, and they both ended up loitering outside the entrance to the caves. Vigo then ended up getting sent backwards, but that actually did allow him to straighten his path and enter the caves first, something which Simon needed a little bit more time to do. With 3 minutes remaining, Vigo was well on his way to Red Station, Simon had just exited the tunnels, and Carrie was about to depart Snow Jam. Turns out the area surrounding Red Station and leading to the main events is somewhat unfriendly for this challenge, though not impossible to navigate. With 2 minutes remaining, Simon had just gone past the race sign, and Vigo was still ahead, but not travelling particularly fast. Luckily for him though, Simon ended up going back and forth in this area a couple of times. And Carrie also got stuck behind this tree big time, so she might have to step it up quite a bit if she wants to make it to Metro City. With just 60 seconds left, Vigo prepared to make his Metro City entrance. And shortly after turning the first corner of Metro City with some assistance from a rail, Simon made his own entrance. With 30 seconds left, Carrie managed to get herself jammed on this rock. I don't think she's going to make it to Metro City at this point. Yeah, no, she definitely isn't. 20 seconds remaining and Vigo has cleared the first big ramp. And he jumps off the main path as soon as he hits the second corner. He then proceeded to get jammed between a pole and a building as Simon cleared that big ramp and has maintained some pretty impressive speed. But Vigo didn't get stuck for too long, ensuring that Simon's late momentum wasn't going to be enough. And the runs finished with Vigo maintaining his somewhat slender lead. Carrie also ended up stopping on the Metro City course itself, but when the clock ran out, she was still in the transitional area, so technically she still didn't make it, though to her credit, she got very close. To Griff's credit also, he ended up finishing just short of Green Station despite his misadventures. And Nate's slow and steady run at least saw him make some ground on Snow Jam. And he also got stuck on Intimidator in a pretty similar way to Carrie, so he could have made it even further than he ultimately did. That makes for at least one shuffle around in the top 5 that we saw earlier. So the riders ahead of him didn't collapse hard enough for Nate to pull off a Stephen Bradbury, but he did manage to overtake Griff in 4th. So I guess he pulled off a quarter of a Bradbury. And you might think our podium's decided already, but remember, this was best of 3. So Simon still had one more chance, and Vigo and Carrie each had 2 more chances to improve on their best runs. For getting so far ahead of everyone else on those runs, I decided to reward Vigo, Simon, and Carrie with full toughness in addition to full speed and acceleration. Because I thought that if full toughness would stop them from falling over so much, then Vigo might have been able to get even further down Metro City if he had better toughness. And if that stat doesn't influence these runs all that much, then I was expecting all the riders to just get stuck at the bottom of Gravity anyway, so I figured I didn't have anything to lose. With Vigo, I was proven right, as he got stuck in the dead zone on both his second and third runs. But I was proven wrong with Kaori, because on her first run, she got trapped in the Mac Rocks instead. And then her third run ended in the dead zone. You'd probably expect Simon to do the same, as he only had one chance to improve on his run, but he actually did manage to clear Gravitude on his final run as well. Now when he rounded that fence, he was about 30 seconds behind Vigo's best run. But at the bottom of Ruthless Ridge, that deficit had extended to about 2 minutes. And his fate was definitely sealed when he got stuck at this rail between Green Station and Snow Jam. So Simon proves to be the most consistent rider in this challenge, but only about 75% of the way down Snow Jam is where his third run ends. So here's your final podium for the SSX 3 All-Peak No Input Challenge. In third place is Kaori Nishidaki, though she may be a little bit disappointed with that given how far ahead she was earlier on in her best run. Or at least she might be if she was, a real person. Second place goes to Simon Stark, who was fighting tooth and nail for that gold medal right to the end. But the gold medal instead goes to Mr. Vigo Rolling, my initial third favourite rider to win this challenge. So after 23 years, maybe Vigo has finally shown that he's good for something.
Number 1! Just like that!
Now after orchestrating all of those runs, I also decided to do the no input challenge with every cheat character in the game. But since there's about 15 of them, I only did one attempt with them each. To save time, I'm just going to focus on the riders that did make it past the end of Gravitude. The first was Eddie, who later managed to get wedged between this rock in Ruthless Ridge for about 4 minutes. So he can only make it as far as the path leading to the Snow Jam start area. The next successful rider was Sia, who had a bit more fortune than Eddie, finishing in the tunnel connecting Snow Jam to Blue Station. Then when I went to transport myself back to a lodge to change my character, the game froze. Hero had one of the slowest runs I'd seen up to the end of Gravitude yet, but he still had the determination to keep on going. Then he decided to start banging his head on the walls and intimidate her for 1.5 minutes. So in the end, he made it just past Green Station. And the only non-human or mystery rider that I managed to see get past Gravitude was Bunny-san, who actually managed to fall into a wormhole on his way to Ruthless Ridge. Then at the start of the course itself, managed to clip through the fence and spend about 1.5 minutes loitering in that area. That was basically the only part of his run that was truly terrible, and he ended up basically equaling Kaori's best run in the competition. So if you really want to try this challenge with a cheat character, then it looks like Bunny-san might have the most potential. Though overall, I would say that Griff is still the best rider to attempt these runs with, as I ended up getting my personal best no-input run with him later on. And if you're wondering what the best ever no-input run of the All-Peak Jam is currently, then I believe it would be this run by Sam, using Griff as well, which got to this big jump in Metro City. So if it is actually possible to make it from the top of Big Mountain to the bottom before time runs out, then no one's come forward to say that they've achieved it yet. With that, I'm going to finally start wrapping up this video that I've probably spent a little bit too much time working on. But if you've made it this far into the video, then I hope that you did enjoy it. Thank you for watching, and bye.